A hush had fallen over the halls of King Thranduil. Word had come from the Council of Elrond, summoning one from among the woodland realm to aid the ring-bearer on his treacherous quest to destroy the One Ring. Thranduil's warriors spoke in subdued murmurs, certain that the king's son, Prince Legolas, would answer that call. Ever had Legolas been the keenest archer, the swiftest scout, and the most at home traveling beyond the forest's borders. Rumors like soft autumn leaves drifted through Mirkwood. Legolas the brave, Legolas the bold, a surefire pick to join a fellowship that would shape the fate of Middle-earth. And yet, when the council's summons arrived from Imladris, Legolas chose not to answer. King Thranduil announced to his court that his son would remain in Mirkwood, for dark stirrings once again threatened the forest, and someone needed to hold back the shadows. There were orcs enough prowling the edges of the Greenwood, and Dol Guldur's influence still lurked at the southern reaches. Thranduil trusted only Legolas to command his forces, for Mirkwood's own fate hung by a thread. While Legolas's heart longed to heed the call and walk the roads of destiny with the Fellowship, a sense of familial and patriotic duty bound him. And so, with a quiet yet steady grace, Legolas bowed to his father's command. Mirkwood, once Greenwood the Great, had not yet recovered from the lingering darkness of the necromancer, and even the smallest spider brood now threatened to spread poison further into its heart. Rumors told of orcs massing on the woodland borders, bolstered by some unseen power. Even if he did not know the full measure of the threat, Legolas sensed that if Mirkwood were to fall, all of Middle-earth would be weaker when the final battles against the enemy arose. So, with a heavy sigh, he returned to the royal halls and called his captains to council. They would fortify the forest, drive back the orcs, and search for the hidden nests of spiders that multiplied in the gloom. It was not the grand quest of the Fellowship, but in its own way it was no less urgent. For every wood elf who fell, a chime of sorrow echoed in Legolas's mind. He would not suffer the forest that had nurtured him to succumb to darkness. Under the starlit sky, King Thranduil bid his warriors to stand ready. The great gates of his palace, fashioned from living rock and twisted roots, were reinforced. Patrols were doubled along the enchanted river, and the watchers at the ancient forest paths were never at ease. Legolas, for all his yearning to see the wide world, found himself forging a new path. In that quiet acceptance, he discovered a different kind of courage. He would be the shield of Mirkwood, even if it meant forsaking the legendary fellowship that might, in time, sing songs of glory. The following weeks tested his resolve. Rumors snaked through the trees of small orc raiding parties assaulting outlying elvish settlements. One night, while the moon lay hidden behind clouds, a wounded scout stumbled into the palace courtyard. His leg was bloodied, an orcish arrow protruding from his thigh. Breathless, the scout relayed dire news. At least 100 orcs were encamped along the forest road, only a day's ride away. They gathered in the darkness, perhaps awaiting reinforcements or a signal to strike deeper into Mirkwood. Summoning his captains, Legolas formed a plan. They would not wait for the orcs to come to them. Instead, Legolas led a preemptive strike at dawn. Under the tree canopy, the elven warriors moved like whispers, fleet-footed and silent. As the first grey light touched the eastern sky, the elves descended upon the orc camp. Bows sang, swift and lethal. Slender elven swords flickered in the half-light, though the orcs snarled and howled. The coordinated elven assault took them by surprise. It was a short and decisive battle, and when it was done, the encampment was shattered, and only a few scattered orcs fled deeper into the forest, trailing black blood behind them. Yet Legolas could not take rest. Though victorious, his scouts brought word of further enemy movements. Dol Guldur once more seemed to stir. The menacing fortress in southern Mirkwood, abandoned but never truly cleansed, may have sheltered new horrors. Glowing eyes were seen at night, and strange, dissonant cries echoed from its broken walls. No one dared investigate alone. At the same time, the spider nests had multiplied, weaving webs across overgrown paths, making once familiar roads perilous. Legolas quickly learned he had no shortage of tasks. So he threw himself into his duties, training new recruits, fortifying watchtowers, and riding out with scouts to gather intelligence. Amid these trials, a flicker of doubt occasionally gnawed at his mind. How fared the Fellowship? He had never met the hobbit, Frodo Baggins, yet he had heard from Gandalf of the halfling's resilient spirit. He wondered who else now served in his stead. He pictured a dwarf, Gimli, son of Gloin, by Frodo's side, perhaps. Legolas consoled himself that, though he would have cherished the chance at forging unity between elves and dwarfs, Mirkwood was too important to leave vulnerable. Time wended on, measured in quiet forest battles, tense nights on patrol, and the ever-deepening gloom toward the forest's southern edges. By the crisp season of autumn, Legolas's hair was laced with stray leaves, and the strain of daily warfare showed in the new lines etched into his fair face. King Thranduil, too, carried a sadness in his voice. The father worried for the son, but more so for the forest they both loved. Then, one morning, a surprise visitor arrived. Gandalf the Grey, hat askew, cloak damp with morning dew, trudged into Thranduil's halls. Weariness weighed heavy in his eyes, yet a sparkle kindled within them upon seeing Legolas. "My dear prince," he said in his gravelly voice, "I should have known you'd be here among the brambles and the boughs. I bring urgent tidings, and I must speak with you." In a private audience, Gandalf explained that war would soon break upon all of Middle-earth. The Fellowship had taken shape. Frodo Baggins had set forth with companions both noble and true, but the enemy was cunning, and darkness was spreading like a plague. "We need you, Legolas," Gandalf admitted, brows furrowed in concern. "Yet I see Mirkwood has its own battles." Legolas's chest tightened. "How fare the Hobbit and the Fellowship?" "They have parted ways, facing perils on many roads," the wizard answered. "Aragorn leads a rescue mission in the west, while Frodo and Sam have ventured alone toward Mordor. Boromir of Gondor has fallen. Even now, the world braces for siege. Mordor's armies move, but so do the orcs of the Misty Mountains, and the threat from Dol Guldur has never truly vanished." Legolas closed his eyes. "Then Middle-earth bleeds from all sides, does it not?" Gandalf nodded. "It does. Yet your forest bleeds as well. I can sense it in the air. I believe the enemy is testing you, dividing the free peoples so that none can muster the force to resist him in unity. He hopes Mirkwood will be consumed by darkness if left to fend for itself." Sorrow weighed on Legolas's heart. In that moment he felt the full measure of being a prince, responsible for his own realm, yet wishing to stand beside allies for the good of all Middle-earth. He told Gandalf of his father's command and his own convictions. "I cannot abandon this forest, Gandalf," he said quietly. "If Mirkwood falls, what hope remains in the east?" Gandalf placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You stand guard, then. Let no shadow pass. There is no shame in defending your homeland. Fight well, and your name shall echo in the songs of the ages, in its own way." With that, Gandalf took his leave, determined to counsel King Thranduil briefly before continuing his journey. Legolas accompanied him through the twisting corridors until they parted in the courtyard. For a moment, Legolas wished to go with the wizard, to run swiftly across field and mountain to rejoin the great fight. But as though sensing this tug, Gandalf turned and said softly, "All roads will lead to the same end, my dear Legolas. This war will come to you no matter where you stand." As the wizard vanished into the green gloom, Legolas breathed deep. He felt the inevitability of coming darkness. And so the greenwood prepared for war. Throughout the winter, Mirkwood's elves labored to reinforce outposts and forge new arrows. The forging of weapons in a forest that prized nature above all was a solemn affair, but necessity demanded it. The glimpses of orc patrols became more frequent, and the chill in the air felt unnatural, as though bolstered by a malice that had not fully retreated since the days of the necromancer. One night, scouts returned with dire news. A significant orc battalion, possibly numbering in the hundreds, was mustering near the abandoned fortress of Dol Guldur. With them were walks, fierce wolf beasts, and reports of a cloaked figure, tall and ghastly, commanding them. Was it one of the 9? Legolas felt dread coil in his stomach, but he did not waver. He took up his bow and prepared a company of Mirkwood's finest archers to confront the threat. If this force was allowed to grow, it might decimate the entire woodland. Thus began a weeks-long campaign in the southern reaches, near the haunted ruins. Legolas's company struck swiftly, choosing to engage smaller orc bands rather than allow them to consolidate. They lured ambush parties into tight forest groves, where the elves had an advantage amid the ancient boles and woven branches. Arrows flew with lethal grace, and elven swords clashed against orcish iron. Yet in those dank shadows, a heavier menace lay. More than once, Legolas felt an icy presence creeping at the corners of his mind, as if something unseen cast a black gaze upon him. He recalled Gandalf's warning. The enemy's hand was stretched wide, sowing fear and corruption throughout the land. And Legolas knew that no matter how many orcs they slew, the real fight had yet to arrive. One evening, under a silver moon, the elves scouted closer to Dol Guldur, the once feared stronghold of the necromancer. Legolas led a small party, just 6 elves, each with centuries of woodcraft behind them, across twisted vines and rotting drawbridges that spanned long, empty moats. From a hidden vantage, they witnessed orcs constructing crude barricades and forging black arrows. A monstrous warg padded among them, its glowing eyes scanning the darkness. And, atop a half-collapsed tower, they beheld a tall figure, robed in black, face veiled by shadows. In that presence, an eerie hush covered the clearing. Legolas gripped his bow so tightly his knuckles whitened. He had faced orcs and spiders before, but this figure was something worse. The moment felt steeped in doom, and yet he forced himself to watch, memorizing the enemy's numbers and fortifications. Fear was not enough to drive him away. Mirkwood needed knowledge if it stood any chance to repel this new wave of malice. When they slunk away, unseen, Legolas's mind churned with the gravity of what they'd witnessed. If this was one of the 9, or a new servant of Sauron's design, the southern part of Mirkwood was threatened by more than just skirmishes. It could be a staging ground for war. King Thranduil, upon hearing their report, ordered a full-scale strike at Dol Guldur before the orcs could entrench themselves. The time for subtlety was past. Gathering nearly every able-bodied warrior in the realm, Legolas led a 2-pronged assault. One company approached from the west, skirting the edges of the forest, while the second approached from the north. Their aim? Converge upon Dol Guldur at twilight, when orcs typically favored the gloom. The risk was tremendous. Mirkwood could not afford to lose too many elves in open conflict, but neither could they allow this cancer to grow. The hour arrived. With quiet determination, the elven companies descended upon the ruined fortress. Horns blew, not in brash challenge, but in a haunting elven cry, echoing through the black trees. Arrows rained upon the orcs, who scattered in shocked confusion. Legolas surged forward, an embodiment of the forest's wrath, every arrow finding its mark. The orcs shrieked, brandishing crude axes and spears, but the elves were swift, dancing around them in a deadly ballet. Yet the robed figure stood atop the crumbling tower, chanting words in a foul tongue. Shadows writhed on the ground, forming twisted shapes like living nightmares. Some elves faltered, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of dread. Legolas felt his heart race. For an instant, the forest seemed to reel beneath him, the weight of centuries pressing down. But he recalled Gandalf's reassurance that all roads led to the same end, the final confrontation against Shadow. Now, in Mirkwood's darkest hour, Legolas would not let fear command him. Drawing a deep breath, he closed his eyes and hummed a song of starlight, a tune he had learned from his mother long ago, a lullaby whispered under the shining tapestry of Varda's heavens. The gentle melody rose in him, lending him courage. Opening his eyes, he loosed a single arrow at the chanting figure. Whether by sheer skill or some strange grace, the arrow flew straight and true, piercing the figure's chest. A cry, like 1,000 echoes, reverberated among the broken stones, and the black-robed menace staggered. The unnatural gloom lessened, freeing the elves from the oppressive weight. Bolstered, they fought with renewed vigor. The orcs, leaderless and beset on all sides, fell into disarray. By night's end, the fortress courtyard was strewn with their carcasses, and the wargs lay silent, their savage growls forever stilled. Legolas climbed the tower's stair, 2 elves trailing behind him. There he found only an empty cloak of black cloth and a faint sense of dread lingering in the air. Whether the figure had truly died or merely vanished, no one could say. But the hold Dol Guldur had on Mirkwood was broken, at least for the time being. The fortress, battered by the ages, had no dark occupant left to command it. When the grey light of dawn crept through the broken walls, Legolas gazed across the forest canopy, awash in the pale glow of morning. The cost had been high. Many elves lay wounded or slain, but Mirkwood had not fallen. The southern fortress had been wrested, at least partially, from the enemy's grasp. In that solemn sunrise, Legolas felt both triumph and sorrow. He recalled how, in another life, he might have joined a company of heroes who traversed perilous roads. Moria, Rohan, Gondor, carrying out tasks that would lead them to the very heart of Mordor. He could have seen the White City and the golden fields of Rohan, and might have fought side by side with a dwarf, forging an unlikely friendship. Yet he had chosen this path. To protect the forest that was dear to him, to stand alongside his father's people. And in doing so, he had carved out a vital role in the grand tapestry of the War of the Ring, holding the line in the east so that darkness did not encroach unchecked. In the weeks that followed, Mirkwood began to heal. The orcs, battered and leaderless, retreated, and the spider nests were systematically rooted out. King Thranduil ensured that the forest would not be left wanting for guardians, and though the War of the Ring raged on in the distant lands, the woodland realm proved a bulwark against the enemy's attempts to flank the northern kingdoms. Messengers brought stories of Helm's Deep, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and the final confrontation at the Black Gate. Elves whispered that the One Ring was destroyed, that the Dark Lord was no more. When the news of victory at last reached Mirkwood, a quiet joy spread among the elves. The forest exhaled a soft sigh of relief. Flowers bloomed in sun-dappled glades, and birdsong returned. Legolas, standing upon a platform high in the ancient oaks, felt a pang of mingled joy and regret. He had not joined the Fellowship. He had not seen the White City, reclaimed in its glory. But if he had left, who would have stood against the shadows in Mirkwood's darkest hour? His father found him there, gazing upon the sea of leaves. Thranduil gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You have saved our people," he said, voice proud and gentle. "Because of your choice, our home has endured." Legolas nodded. In the distance, a flock of bright thrushes darted beneath the canopy, their calls echoing over the green expanse. He held a fresh arrow in one hand, turning it thoughtfully. Beyond Mirkwood, the world was changing, ushering in a new era. Perhaps one day he would visit the lands he had only heard of in tales, meet the hobbits who had shouldered a burden that reshaped the world, and learn the ways of dwarves and men in times of peace. Yet for now, he was right where he should be. Prince of Mirkwood, protector of the Greenwood, son of King Thranduil, and guardian against whatever shadows might dare to rise again. In the hush of the twilight, the trees seemed to whisper in agreement. Though the Fellowship's path might have led Legolas to the far corners of Middle-earth, his heart had remained bound to the forest that had nurtured him since birth. And, in that devotion, he found both purpose and honor, proving that every stand against darkness, no matter how far from the grand stage, was a vital stroke in the greater story of hope.